August 1945. In a quiet, remote corner of New Mexico, life seemed peaceful. The days were hot and long, and the nights were quiet under a blanket of stars. But this quietness was not going to last. First came the Trinity bomb test, clearly visible to all the residents of the small village. Just looking at it caused some people to go blind. But that wasn't even the talk of the town. Next came the major incident. Two boys came face to face with a massive trench in the ground, about 30 meters wide and 30 centimeters deep. At the end of the trench was a giant object shaped like an avocado, with a smooth, gray surface that shone in the sunlight. There was smoke all over the object, and the air smelt burnt. What started as a loud bang that everyone thought was just another bomb would end up completely changing the lives of everyone in this small desert village. This is the story of the most realistic UFO crash, where we not only have an eyewitness, but also an actual piece of the UFO. This is the 1945 Trinity UFO Crash. It's 1945, and World War II is still at play. The US was hard at work creating the bomb that would end the war. And so they created the Trinity nuclear test site to test out that very same bomb. 18 miles northwest of the Trinity nuclear test site was the Padilla family's ranch. It was a huge, dry piece of land with cracks in the earth and patches of tough desert plants. There, the family house stood strong, built to handle the desert's heat and winds. In the yard was a well, and nearby, their old pickup truck often waited to be used. Life here wasn't easy, but the Padillas were hardworking and proud. 9-year-old Jose Padilla was the youngest in the family, but he worked just as hard as anyone else. His father, Faustino Padilla, had a job with the WPA, better known as the Work Projects Administration, and his mother, Inez, took care of the house and everyone in it. 5 weeks earlier, on July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb had exploded at the Trinity test site. The test was just 18 miles from the Padilla ranch. Jose was probably too young to fully understand the test, but everyone felt its weight. The explosion wasn't just loud and bright, it felt like the entire world was shifting. In such, Inez had lost sight in one eye from the flash of the atomic bomb test. But she kept going because the bills couldn't pay themselves. Jose often spent his days with his best friend, 7-year-old Remigio Baca. Remigio lived nearby, and his family's life was much like the Padillas. Remigio's dad, who had previously been a tenant farmer, worked as an assistant at the Veterans Hospital in Albuquerque. Together, the two boys shared chores, meals, and adventures in the vast desert they called home. The desert was more than a place to live, it was their world. But little did they know that the desert was about to reveal a story of its own. August 16, 1945, started like any other day. Jose and Remigio had been told to find a missing cow. She was about to give birth, and they needed to bring her back. The boys rode on horseback, scanning the land. Then, out of nowhere, a loud bang filled the air. The ground shook beneath their horses' hooves, and a plume of smoke rose in the distance. The boys stopped in their tracks, with their eyes wide with surprise. Without saying a word, they urged their horses toward the smoke, curious to see what was going on. As they got closer, the scene kept getting stronger and stronger. The ground was ripped open, forming a huge trench about 30 meters wide and 30 centimeters deep. At the end of the trench was something shocking, a giant object. It was shaped like an avocado, with a smooth gray surface that shimmered slightly in the sunlight. There was smoke all around it, the bushes nearby were burnt, and small fires crackled here and there. The boys slid off their horses and crept closer, staying low. Jose reached for his binoculars. He normally carried them to spot the stray cows and check for danger, but today he would be looking at something completely out of this world. As he adjusted the lens, he froze. There was a hole in the side of the object, which had probably collided with a nearby radio tower about 15 meters high. Inside the object, they could see something, or someone, moving. Through the binoculars, the boys saw 3 strange creatures inside the object. They were small and looked nothing like humans, but more like the size of a praying mantis. Their heads were shaped like pears, and their eyes were large and shiny, reflecting the light. Their arms were long and thin, with 4 fingers on each hand. Their gray skin looked smooth but fragile, almost like it might tear if touched. The creatures moved in quick, jerky motions. They looked scared. Soon after the crash, they made high-pitched noises that reminded Jose of an animal in pain, or like the cries of a newborn baby. The boys would later compare these creatures to various insects, such as praying mantis, Jerusalem cricket, or fire ants, with pear-shaped heads. The nose and mouth compartments were like small holes. In spite of the description, Jose thought them to be humans and said he felt their fear and pain. For a moment, the boys just watched, but fear crept in too. What if these creatures were dangerous? What if something worse was about to happen? They whispered back and forth, trying to decide what to do. They wanted to stay and look at these creatures more closely, but they were terrified. Finally, they decided to leave. As they mounted their horses, they couldn't help but look back at the mysterious object. That day, they would go back to the ranch and tell their family what they had seen. Jose and Remigio were filled with excitement and fear after their incredible discovery. They couldn't wait to go back to the crash site and find out more about the strange creatures. But the next day, August 17th, 1945, they couldn't return to the crash site. The residents didn't see much of it crash, and those who heard the crash probably thought it was another test. The kids couldn't go back because they had too many chores to do on the Padilla ranch. Life on a ranch demanded hard work, and their tasks couldn't wait, even for something as extraordinary as a crashed UFO. The boys reluctantly stayed home, their minds racing with thoughts about the strange object and its mysterious occupants. On the 3rd day, August 18th, they finally had the chance to go back. This time, they didn't go alone. Jose's father, Faustino Padilla, and a family friend, Eddie Apodaca, who was a state police officer, accompanied them, because remember, the kids told everyone about the strange thing they saw. The boys eagerly led the way, retracing their steps to the crash site. What they found there was still as astonishing as it had been 2 days earlier. The strange, avocado-shaped object still sat at the end of the trench it had carved into the earth. Its metallic surface gleamed under the harsh desert sun, and the ground around it remained warm to the touch. Pieces of debris were scattered nearby, and the burnt bushes still bore the marks of the crash. Faustino and Eddie came closer to the craft cautiously. They examined the large hole in its side, the same opening through which the boys had seen the creatures moving. After a moment of hesitation, the 2 men climbed inside, while Jose and Remigio waited anxiously outside. When Faustino and Eddie emerged, their faces were pale, and they looked shaken. They refused to discuss what they had seen inside the craft. Whatever it was, it had clearly disturbed them. Instead, they warned the boys not to tell anybody about the discovery, not their friends, cousins, not even their family members. They cautioned that this was grown-up business, and it was better if it stayed that way because the kids could get into trouble if anyone found out. The boys nodded, but their curiosity only grew. What had their father and Eddie seen? Why was it so important to keep it a secret? Despite the warning, they couldn't resist the pull of the mystery. Later that same day, when the adults were occupied, Jose and Remigio slipped away and returned to the crash site alone. When the boys arrived, they found they were no longer the only ones interested in the strange object. Soldiers had begun arriving at the site. Trucks and equipment were scattered around, and men in uniforms were gathering debris from the ground. Jose and Remigio hid behind bushes, watching as the soldiers worked. The presence of the military confirmed what they had already suspected. This was not an ordinary event. On August 19, 1945, the fourth day since the discovery, the Padilla family received an unexpected visitor. A man named Sergeant R. Avila arrived at their ranch. Speaking on behalf of the U.S. Army, he explained that the military needed access to the property to recover what he called an experimental weather balloon. He said they would need to cut the fence and build a road to reach the site. A wide gate would also be installed to accommodate their equipment. Sergeant Avila talked about the importance of keeping the operation quiet, warning the family not to speak to anyone about what was happening. Faustino agreed, and by August 20th, soldiers were hard at work. They brought heavy machinery to the site, including a massive crane and an 18-wheel low-body trailer designed for transporting large loads. A new road was constructed, and the wide gate was installed as promised. The strange object was carefully lifted onto the trailer, covered with a tarpaulin, and tightly secured. Jose and Remigio continued to observe the operation from a distance, hidden by the scanty desert vegetation. They noted that the soldiers treated the recovery as if it were an ordinary task. They wore standard uniforms and didn't appear to take any special precautions around the object. After their workdays, many of the men would relax at the Owl Bar and Cafe in San Antonio, which was a popular local spot. The boys couldn't believe how casually the soldiers were acting. To them, this was the most incredible thing they had ever witnessed. They whispered to each other about what might happen next. Where would the military take the object? What would they do with it? And most importantly, what had happened to the creatures they had seen inside? By day 25, the operation was nearing its end. The boys knew their time to see the object up close was running out. That night, after the soldiers had left the site, Jose and Remigio made a daring decision. They would return to the crash site one last time, and they would not return without taking what they called a little souvenir. The boys crept through the darkness, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. When they reached the site, the object was still on the trailer, waiting to be transported. The tarpaulin covering was flapping slightly in the night breeze as Jose decided to get closer. Using a crowbar, Jose pried back a corner of the tarp, revealing the metallic surface underneath. He climbed onto the trailer and slipped into the opening in the object's side. Once inside, he found out that the interior was strangely smooth. It was metallic, almost looking like yellow brass, but without shine. The walls were curved and appeared to be made of seamless panels. There were no rivets, furniture, or visible controls. The floor was flat, and a transparent dome of the top was constructed to let light in from the outside. It was a plastic-like dome shape measuring about 70 centimeters. On one side of the interior was a small panel, about 30 by 24 inches. Attached to it, with pins, was a piece of metal. Jose worked quickly, loosening the piece with the crowbar. It came free easily, and he handed it to Remigio, who was waiting outside. This was their souvenir, a piece of the mystery they would keep hidden for years. For Jose and Remigio, the events of August 1945 were unforgettable. The strange object, the mysterious creatures, and the military's swift response all pointed to something extraordinary. Though they were warned to stay silent, just like so many extraordinary events, this couldn't be kept under wraps for long. Eventually, Jose Padilla now an old man, came forward. Not just with the testimony that you heard right now, but also with the souvenir that they had taken all those years ago. And thus began another chapter in this UFO story. While we have the full facts of the case, it is important to look at the background for it. The year 1945 was a notable time in human history. The world had just witnessed the end of a devastating war, and the dawn of the atomic age brought both hope and fear. But there was something else happening during this period, an increase in strange sightings and unexplained phenomena. Just 2 years later, the infamous Roswell incident would take place in New Mexico, drawing enormous attention to the idea of unidentified flying objects. People across the United States and beyond reported seeing mysterious lights and objects in the sky. It seemed like the world was on the brink of uncovering something really extraordinary. So, was the Trinity crash part of this wave of unexplained events? Or was it part of something more unique? Unlike many of these cases, which often relied solely on eyewitness accounts, the Trinity UFO crash came with visible evidence. Jose Padilla and Remigio Baca, the two boys who first discovered the crash site, managed to take a piece of the mysterious craft as a souvenir. The fragment, a smooth piece of metal, was unlike anything they had ever seen. Years later, in 2015, it would be examined by Frontier Analysis, a chemical testing lab in Ohio. The reports would indicate that the piece was made of aluminum mixed with silicon and copper. This is a typical combination found in engine parts, and their isotopic ratios were those of Earth. Now, while these materials are not uncommon on Earth, the exact combination and the way it was processed raised questions. That's like your car running efficiently on a mixture of petroleum, diesel, and water. Some researchers suggested it could have originated from advanced technology, possibly extraterrestrial. Another intriguing detail was the military's response. The Army claimed that the object was an experimental weather balloon that had gone off course. But if that were true, why did they bring in an 18-wheel heavy-load truck to transport it? The object was described as large and heavy, far beyond what would be expected for a simple balloon. The military's actions didn't stop there. They searched the Padilla family's property thoroughly, looking for anything they deemed significant. What exactly were they hoping to find? And why was it so important to recover every trace of this so-called weather balloon? Even more curious were the actions taken to recover the object. The construction of a new road and gate on the Padilla Ranch was no small task. Heavy machinery was brought in, and the operation was conducted with precision. If the object truly was just a balloon, why go to such lengths? Why the secrecy? For Jose and Remigio, watching the soldiers work from their hidden vantage point, it was clear that whatever had crashed on their land was no ordinary piece of equipment. And then there were the creatures. The boys' descriptions of the being inside the craft added another layer of mystery. Unlike the mechanical explanations offered for the craft itself, the presence of these entities suggested something far more extraordinary. Their pear-shaped heads, large reflective eyes, and thin, insect-like bodies were unlike anything known to exist on Earth. Could they have been intelligent life forms from another world? The boys certainly thought so, and their first-hand account has been a cornerstone of the Trinity UFO case ever since. But that doesn't mean that the Trinity UFO case doesn't have its critics. Many of the biggest critics point to the fact that this entire case relies on the testimony of two people who were both kids at the time. Maybe the entire incident was their overactive imaginations? But it's worth noting that the Trinity crash predates Roswell by 2 years. UFO research was still in its beginning stages, and public interest in flying saucers had not yet reached its peak. This was at a time when such incidents were more likely to be dismissed or covered up. In the case of Trinity, the swift and secretive actions of the military suggest they wanted to keep the incident under wraps. Why else would they seize evidence and warn the Padilla family to stay silent? But most critics still think otherwise. One of the loudest critics of the case is a writer named Brian Dunning. He says that the whole story is made up by people who knew they were making it up. He says it's not a distorted memory, not an honestly misinterpreted experience, but a lie. Dunning's opinion comes from research work by a journalist named Douglas Dean Johnson, first published in May 2023. Johnson found problems with the story. For example, the story talks about a policeman named Eddie Apodaca, a friend of Jose's father. He supposedly helped look through the UFO wreckage. But here's the problem. Records show that Eddie was in Europe during World War II in 1945. He didn't even become a policeman until 1951. How could he have been there? And there's more. Johnson also says that one of the witnesses, Reem Baca, kept changing his story. It seems like every time he talked to someone new, he told the story a little differently. Dunning says this is a big red flag. He thinks the story just doesn't add up, and that no one should believe their UFO story. Son of World War II Army pilot William Brophy revealed that one of his father's last missions involved flying over the area where the crash reportedly took place. Paola Harris had also interviewed him, saying that during one of these flights, Mr. Brophy's father had seen two boys riding a horse, whom she believes was the young Mr. Padilla and his friend Remigio Baca. This creates a lot of credibility for the boys' story, since if there was no crash, then they wouldn't have been in the area. Going back to Eddie Apodaca, Valet says it's true there's confusion about Eddie, but here's something interesting. The name Apodaca is very common in New Mexico. Could there have been another policeman with the same name, and the children just got confused between the policeman and their father's friend? Valet doesn't have all the answers yet, but he's still looking into it. What about Reem Baca's changing story? Valet thinks there might be a reason for this. When Reem and the other witness, Jose Padilla, were kids, they promised each other they would never tell anyone what they saw. It was their secret. Breaking that promise might have caused trouble between them. Valet wonders if Reem changed parts of the story to make it sound more exciting for newspapers and researchers as a way to rebel against Jose and his faithful rendition of the story. That could explain why some details don't match. While Brian Dunning hasn't responded to any of this, one thing remains clear. This story is far from over. The 1945 Trinity UFO crash still has some major unanswered questions. Just who were those creatures that the kids saw? Where did the UFO come from? And where is it now? Whether you believe in these claims or not, it's safe to say that the world will not forget this story anytime soon. But if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to watch this one about the most paranormal mountain in the world, where people go to disappear.